Today we're going to be taking a look at a few different things here for you guys. I might bleed a brake, change some flat tires, adjust some shifting, and a few more secret tips along the way. So welcome to the video and stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this. So I put some gloves on for this episode because it's going to get a little bit dirty. I think the first thing I'm going to do is show you guys a really common issue that happens on these electric bikes, especially sometimes even if you order them to your house and you get them out of the box, they might need this particular thing done to them just straight from the factory, and that is bleeding a brake. Now there's two different types of brakes that you're going to find on your electric bike, maybe even three, but typically you're going to find that the bike has a disc brake, kind of like this one. You're going to find the bike has a disc brake kind of like that with a caliper right here. Typically if it's a hydraulic brake, it's probably going to use a mineral oil. You're probably going to want to get some mineral oil and a brake bleed kit, and I'll explain a little bit more here in a second. So I'm probably gonna get my brake bleed kit down, a really good kit to have. And on the inside of this kit, as you can see, I got different adapters and things everywhere, which is something you're gonna need for this project. They give you tons of different brake bleed syringe adapters in here with lots of different thread pitches. And then you're gonna get a whole bunch of these different syringes like this. But this is my bottle of mineral oil. So now I think what we're gonna do, we're gonna lift this bike right here up in the stand. This is the Aventon Pace 500. We're gonna get it lifted up in the stand, and I'm gonna start by pulling the rear wheel off. So lifting these big heavy e-bikes all day in the shop, decided to get some of these electric park tool stands. Definitely worth their weight. Some of these e-bikes can get all the way up to 120 pounds. And if you're doing this on the ground, you don't necessarily need a bike stand to bleed a brake. Just in our scenario, we're gonna do the brake and the tire at the same time. So in that regard, it's much easier to bring it up on the stand. Basically, as you can see, this line has leaked a little bit of fluid over time. Maybe the gasket's gone bad, and you'll see you can pull the brake all the way to the bar. We're gonna push fluid from the back of the bike at the back caliper in this case, because this is the rear brake. We're gonna start at the bottom and push fluid all the way up through the top, and we're gonna use 2 syringes to do it. There's multiple different ways you can bleed a brake, but in this video, we're only gonna get into the way where you're going to use dual syringes, as that is the hardest way, and in my opinion it's the most common way that you're probably going to run into on most of your electric bikes. So the very first thing that we're going to do here, as you can see right here on the back of the bike, there's a couple zip ties, and this is a good tool to carry with you if you're out in the field. Either a pair of nail clippers could be very simple, or a pair of these pliers, being careful not to nick that wire. Zip ties are out of the way. There's a motor wire that stems out from the end of the wheel right here. And this wire we want to be very careful of, as that has to be unplugged in order to get the rear wheel off. So right here, as you can see, there's a big connection. We're going to undo that connector, so that's your motor wire. On this particular bike, there's actually another Allen wrench bolt holding that piece on right there that I'm going to have to get to from the backside. So we're going to catch up with you guys as soon as I get that removed. You could transfer this knowledge over to pretty much any bike with a hydraulic brake. I just figured in this scenario, I've seen so many of these bikes with squishy brakes like this. Even after a couple months of owning them, they might need a brake bleed anyways. Of course, if you want your local shop to do that, that's great. Most shops are going to have the correct bleed kit to bleed some of these brakes, right? But if not, you can get yourself a bleed kit for around $80, maybe a little cheaper for a decent quality one, and do this at home yourself. While we're in there, we're gonna have to remove the brake pads out of the rear brake caliper. So if you've been curious about how to replace your own brake pads at home, which is something you can easily do, what I would recommend is getting a set of metric Allen wrenches like this, and typically the sizes you're gonna need are 3, 4, 5, and 6. There is a couple other bolts on this bike that require bigger Allen wrenches than that, but your most common again are 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's going to do most things. All right, so as you can see, we've got that motor wire completely disconnected. Make sure that we don't lose that little bolt. Not every e-bike has this bolt holding this in. Most of the time it's just zip tied here to the chainstay. So in that regard, your wires would already be disconnected. For this particular bike, we're going to need an 18mm wrench in order to pull the rear axle, and I have a couple tips about this as well when we're pulling the rear axle. So again, we're on our way to bleeding a brake here, but I figured I might add, if you were on your way to changing a flat tire in the field, this is sort of the step that you would be at. You can do 2 different things. You can get yourself a pair of tire levers, just like these guys. You wouldn't even have to remove any of these wires or anything if you knew there was only one thorn or somewhere that went through and there was a singular hole. you could take half the bead off the tire, and I will show you how to do that a little bit later on in this video. Theoretically, without pulling the tire, you could pull the tube halfway out, put a tire patch on it, and stick it back in there and air the tire up without having to take the rear wheel off. And that's something you could do at home. If you're out in the field, get yourself an 18mm wrench. Go ahead and come behind here. These are 18mm nuts most of the time. Sometimes they're 17s, sometimes they're 19s. We're gonna spin that nut all the way off, because you'll notice here in a second, the axle's not gonna want to clear the derailleur unless these are completely removed, and you can let those hang down there. We can use the box end on this side. We're gonna take that off, spin that loose. I'll set the wrench to the side. Go ahead, and I like to just remove this whole nut, put it somewhere you're not gonna lose it. The best thing that could happen would be the wheel falls out of the dropouts on its own and you gotta hold it up. I can tell you from experience, pretty much that never happens, and let me show you how to get the wheel out with minimal effort. Just like this, and you don't need one this big by any means. You can get away with even a 4-inch one. I even believe you can use a normal wrench. I think it's like a 12mm. But if you put your box end wrench, this is a slotted axle, so box end wrench right over the slotted axle, just like that. Give it a quick wiggle, and it falls right out. First, before we bleed the brake, we're gonna have to take the brake pads out. So I got my set of handy dandy needle nose pliers right here. And as you can see, there's actually a cotter pin holding these brake pads in. So we're gonna try to get around this cotter pin. So we can pull that cotter pin out of there. It looks like these are actually gonna come out of the top. The brake pads are actually held together with this metal clip. That's a centering clip that the brake pad material actually snaps onto over just like that. That's what holds the brake pads centered together. In this case, this bike does not need new brake pads, because what happens a lot of the time is that brake pad material ends up getting so low that steel piece right there actually will ride on the brake rotor. And that's what causes a lot of really nasty brake noises when you hit the brakes. If you hear a sound that sounds like metal on metal, it's probably because after a long time, the big heavy electric bike wore out the brake pad material, whatever that may be, and is now contacting on that metal clip. So if this is the case, when you go to bleed your brakes, make sure to get some new brake pads. The reason we want to get new brake pads is so when we bleed the brake, we slide new pads in there, and the brake is then bled to the depth of new brake pads. If you bleed your brake with old brake pads in there, it's going to feel spongy, and when you go to put new pads in, the brake is actually going to be over bled. So we always want to make sure when we bleed a brake, if it doesn't have a lot of pad material in there, go ahead and slot some new pads in at that point, and you're gonna be better off in the long run. So what I'm actually gonna do here in my stand, as you can see, our brake lever is basically at 90 degrees facing flat. Usually, if it wasn't at 90 degrees and it was still down or it was too far up, you want this right here, this is your bleed screw. You want that facing directly at the ceiling. That way we evacuate all the air, and the air can come directly out the highest point of the brake lever. So at this point, if you're at home, you're gonna want to find something to hold the front wheel straight. If you're very finesseful and you can get away with it not moving, that's great. I like to use this guy right here, and this is actually designed by Park Tool to hold the handlebars straight. Most shops are gonna have these. Again, if you're doing it at home, you absolutely don't need this tool. However, it is a good thing to have. Just generally will hold the handlebars in that straight position. In your brake bleed kit, there's gonna be a couple things they call bleed blocks. Now these are to take up the distance that the brake pads would usually exist in your brake caliper. There's a couple different millimeter measurements, but generally one of the universal ones they give you is going to fit, especially if you get the Park Tool kit. Sometimes if you can't slot it in from the top, if the pads come out the bottom, you would go that way, put your pin through the caliper. The 11 is actually going to fit in there with zero play in between the brake caliper pistons, and that's what you want. The next step here, I believe we're going to need this green adapter for the threads on the bottom of the caliper. At the top, I think is going to be this black. Yeah, so typically with these brakes, you're going to need like a T15 or a T20, maybe even smaller Torx bit in order to take the bleed cap ports off. So this front one looks like it's a T15. I'm actually gonna get my rag set up here because it's gonna get a little dirty. Keep in mind we moved the wheel very far away from where any mineral oil can get to it. Yep, so it is gonna be this black adapter. And there's a couple different ways these thread in, but in general, your electric bike, it's probably gonna have one big bleed port here at the very top. This is gonna be, in my opinion, The best way to do it, you're gonna get the best performance. You're not gonna have to do it more than once if you do it this way and you do it right. So thread in the syringe here on the top. Obviously this is an empty syringe, no fluid, just an empty syringe. Now for the dirty portion, we gotta go down to the caliper, and we're actually gonna thread in our syringe that's full of fluid to the brake caliper. So this is the bottom of the caliper. As you can see, we've got our syringe right here. This bleed port on this caliper is actually located right here on the side. Sometimes they're here in the front. If that's the case, you're gonna have to take one of these caliper bolts out and swivel the caliper. We're gonna have to take this off, and as soon as we remove this, it's gonna start puking fluid, old fluid that is. Ooh, that's actually really small. I believe we're gonna need this green adapter. It wasn't actually the green adapter. It looks like it's gonna be this yellow adapter here. If you were doing this in your house or your garage, obviously we're gonna put a rag under it. The mineral oil is not as corrosive as dot fluid, so you don't really have to be worried that it's gonna eat your paint off your bike or anything like that. What you wanna do is evacuate any last little bit of air out of the line before you thread that on. That way we're minimizing chances that small air bubbles can get up inside the caliper. What we're gonna do is slowly start pushing fluid. Once you've evacuated all the fluid out of the lower syringe, you should have some clean fluid, at least in the top. If your fluid is completely dirty and black, I would repeat this process 2 or 3 times until the fluid does run clean. This line was almost completely dry, however, so this is all new. Pretty sure mostly new fluid. So I would go back then the other direction and continue this process until you see 0 air coming out of either the caliper side or the lever side. As you can see, we still have plenty of air coming out of that caliper side. You notice our syringes have these little blue snaps, and we want to create a vacuum. So what we're going to do, since we just got done pushing fluid from the top to the bottom, we're going to push the snap. That's going to create a vacuum up here at the top of the lever, and we're going to go back down to the bottom. So we're going to remove our syringe, and as quickly as the syringe comes out, we're going to put the bleed port screw back in, tighten that back down, being sure not to over torque anything. There is torque specs for all this stuff. I usually just do them just over hand tight. There's rubber O-rings in there, so you don't want to rip anything. Then what I would do is push back down and flick the lever a little bit. Once you've pushed back and forth a few times, you can go ahead and remove this top syringe. You should have fluid all the way up to the brim on the brake lever. And go ahead and put this bleed port screw back in. Make sure it has the rubber O-rings still on it. And I usually like to tighten those down just over hand tight. That's usually just fine. Obviously, you don't want any fluid on your brake rotor. Definitely don't want any fluid on brake pads. So remember our bleed block we put in. We're gonna take that bleed block out, toss that back in the bleed kit, and then we're gonna spray the whole thing down with degreaser. Go ahead and stick the brake pads back in the brake caliper. We got our cotter pin. Go ahead and put that back through. Okay, brake pads are back in there. We got the cotter pin in, got it all bent up, make sure everything's nice and safe. That's the most important part about a brake bleed. So now the next step I know a lot of people have been looking forward to, how to change the tire. Grab yourself some tire levers just like this. The best thing to do for reliability's sake is just go ahead and replace the whole tube. If the tire is stuck to the rim, meaning that the bead right here on the edge of the wheel has hooked the tire in and you cannot break the bead with your hands, you're gonna have to force it. You're gonna have to put your hands on the backside like this and push the tire towards the center of the wheel. The most common misconception with changing a tire is thinking that you just got to put the tire levers in there and wrench on it and pull it around. I would not do that. It's very easy to just take your thumbs like this, go all the way around the tire, make sure the bead is what we call broken. Essentially, we're pushing the bead of the tire to the center of the wheel. Okay, so you broke the tire bead to the center of the rim. Take the edge of the tire lever, feed it underneath the tire just like that. Come all the way around the tire. Go ahead and pull out the inner tube. As you can see, we've got the brand new inner tube just like this. It's got even a little residual air in it. We're gonna find the hole of the rim right there. At this point, as you can see, we've got the inner tube inside the tire. Go ahead and feed the thing around this direction, all the way around. You're gonna get back to the top and there's 2 things you're gonna run into. Either the tire is gonna be so tight you can't feed it back on the rim like this. In that case, you're gonna have to take your tire levers, put it underneath like that, and force the tire around onto the bead of the tube. What I like to do, come around the backside right here and pinch down and push down on the wheel as best you can, and this applies for any tire. And 99% of the time, at least in my case, tire is gonna slip right on. In my experience is when you have tire inserts and stuff like that, and there isn't enough real estate to actually push that tire to the center of the wheel. And in that regard, you're going to need the tire levers to force the tire back on. Just make sure, pro tip, don't push all the way down to the center of the rim with your tire lever, because if you do that, the sharp edge of the lever is going to pinch the inner tube. You're going to air it up and it's going to be flat. Let's put some air in this guy and we'll throw it back on the bike. Tire pressure on electric bikes is very important. I would actually go towards the harder side of what the tire will allow. You're going to see a significant rise in range on the electric bike if you air it up to the right PSI. So I'm going to check the pressure on this guy and we'll catch up with you when we're putting it back on the bike. Feed the wire through the chain. Get the chain on the bottom, at least bottom 3 sprockets was what I would do. And as you can see, we can actually rotate this axle because it's on a bearing. So I'll rotate the axle in advance before it goes up into the dropouts, making sure the brake rotor goes up in between the brake pads. And we're gonna open our wrench a little bit, rotated our axle, and it slid right up in there. Our brake's working real good up here at the top. The next thing I wanted to talk about is how to adjust shifting on these electric bikes, and not only electric bikes, but really any bike in general. I find that this is a big common problem a lot of people face when they first get their bike. Maybe they pull it right out of the box and the shifting components are not adjusted properly. And right now we're going to show you how to mitigate that. So this piece right here on the back, this is called the derailleur, or the derailleur, some people call it. This is the mechanism that shifts all the gears on the back of your bike. These are your gears right here. This is either going to be called a freewheel or a cassette, depending on how it's mounted to the wheel. But that's not as important right now as this being called the derailleur. Then what you have right here is your shifter cable. Now the derailleur operates off of tension. So as you shift gears, there's an internal cable inside of this cable that's going to move the derailleur up and down the cassette to hit each individual cog, they call it. Now, what usually happens when you first pull the bike out of the box is you're like, sweet, you're going to take it out for your initial ride, and you get on the road and you pedal and it sounds like this. And maybe it shifts and still sounds like junk. 50% of the time, it's just going to be a cable tension issue, but there is a couple more things you want to watch out for. Now, cable tension issues can be solved from this little guy right here. This is the barrel adjuster. You can turn that barrel adjuster either counterclockwise to tighten the cable or clockwise to loosen the cable. If you look straight down on the derailleur should look fairly straight to the cassette teeth on the back. There is one more piece you want to watch out for, and that's the derailleur hanger. This little aluminum piece right here. So what ends up happening is if you take the e-bike and you throw it in the back of your car, or you're on a mountain bike and you hit a mountain bike trail and the derailleur contacts a rock, well, a lot of companies design frames with derailleur hangers. In fact, most bike companies have these if it's got gears, and they make those out of aluminum. So if the derailleur hits something hard, the hanger bends. So looking at your derailleur cage, it should look nice and straight, nothing going on in that case. If it looks like a taco in any which way, that's going to be a bent derailleur cage. At that point, you might have to replace the component. But let me show you how to do a basic shifting adjustment that will work every time. You're going to get out of your Allen wrench kit I mentioned earlier, you're going to get a 5mm Allen wrench, and what you're going to do is come right here to the bottom Allen wrench pinch bolt that holds the cable on. Sometimes these are 9 and 10mm wrench nuts either way, but this one's an Allen, and you're going to take the shifter cable out. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go to your preventative maintenance kit and get some chain lube. I would dab a little bit of chain lube on all the cable tension points along the shifter cable. Good preventative maintenance to do this regardless. It's going to help the cable shift much easier. So if you're in any weird kind of gear and you pulled the cable out, you can pedal the bike slowly forward. As long as the derailleur jumps into that bottom tooth, it's within adjustment, at least along the bottom. To get a little bit technical, there's 2 screws right here. These are your limit screws. So one is going to do your high limit and one's going to do your low limit. Essentially what that means is one, when you tighten it down, is going to limit the chain from coming off of the smallest ring. The other, when you tighten it down, limits the chain from coming off the biggest ring. So as long as those are within adjustment and your derailleur's not falling off either side, and they have little plates along the bottom you can see when they contact, and you want your derailleur hitting here without making noise, hitting here without making noise. You're going to thread in this barrel adjuster nut, put the cable back in. I would come up here, put a little tension on the cable by hand, come up here to the shifter, and if you've clicked half the gears already, go ahead and return that cable as far down as it'll go, meaning that would be returning you to your hardest gear. Put a little tension on the cable. As long as you're in that right gear, on the very bottom and your limit screw is in the right spot, go ahead and lock that screw down, and you just go a little over hand tight. So now once we're in that position, I'm gonna go ahead and pedal the bike and we're gonna see what happens. In this case, looks like it's pretty dead nuts. If it wasn't dead nuts and you pedaled it a little bit, and let's say you push down with your thumb and nothing happens, the derailleur doesn't move quite far enough and you get a grinding noise, that's gonna mean your cable's not tight enough and you're gonna have to turn that barrel adjuster counterclockwise. Now, if you get lucky like I just did and you tension it by hand, you don't have to turn it at all. If it's shifting perfectly, it's fine. Sometimes what can happen is they'll shift perfect for a ride or two when you initially buy a bike, and then the cables will stretch. So I would add that to our preventative maintenance section, and once your cables stretch, go ahead and give that barrel adjuster half a turn, maybe a full turn counterclockwise, or turn it until that noise goes away. And that's how you adjust your shifting perfectly every time. I wanted to talk about some preventative maintenance and maybe some good ways to keep the bike clean, as well as checking out drivetrain wear. And one other thing. So in my last video, I mentioned to keep the batteries on the bike stored between 70 and 100%. I was promptly corrected in the comments below, and upon doing some of my own research, it's actually a better idea to keep the batteries stored between 50 and 70%. Lithium-ion batteries like to be stored between 50 and 70%, especially if you're going to store them for long periods of time. On to the next thing. So the second thing, after riding your bike for a couple weeks, what I like to watch out for is obviously drivetrain wear. If your gears are crunching around and you haven't diagnosed that, you really want to as soon as possible, because what can happen is eventually these cassette teeth will start to wear out, and instead of looking like a complete square, they're going to begin to look like a wave, like a half a wave shape, and the wave will start to develop on the backside of the drivetrain. Once that happens, you're probably going to start to notice the chain's not only going to skip gears, but it's going to jump teeth. The next thing I would do, and the next question I get so much, is how often to lubricate the chain. Realistically, as soon as you get your bike, I would go to your local bike shop or box store and pick up some chain lube. There is so many different types of chain lube, but honestly, I would just go with an oil-based lubricant. There is some dry lubes, wax lubes, and spray lubes you can put on there if you're riding in really dusty, dry conditions. I find with electric bikes, they shift and sound the best with an oil-based lubricant. Just like that. Like I said, there's so many different ways to do this. I'm sure I'm gonna get cooked in the comments for lubricating the chain wrong. I've been doing it like this for years, never had a problem. With different wax lubes, you do have to go through, hit all the individual chain rollers and everything. This is just super quick and easy, something you can do at your house to immediately prevent drivetrain wear from the factory. How do I remove a pedal? Or I can't get my pedal off, it's completely stuck, and I wanna show you right now a tried and true way to get your pedals off every single time. So when you're looking at the bike like this, common practice says that each of the pedals, when you're sitting on the bike, tighten going forward, essentially. So the right-hand side, or the drive side of the bike, the side with the gears, is going to be regular thread. The non-drive side is reverse thread, meaning that it tightens going to the left. So both pedals, I just want to clear the air right now, I know there's lots of controversy. Both pedals are going to tighten towards the front of the bike. They're both going to loosen towards the rear. So let me show you a tried and true trick to get your pedals off every time, because I know there's a lot of confusion. What I'll do, you're going to grab a 15mm wrench or an Allen wrench. If there's an Allen fitting on the back side of your pedal, it's the same thing. Just in this case, I'm going to use a 15mm. This is a big pedal wrench, which yes, does make it a lot easier. You can do this with a 15mm box end wrench. I did it for years in my garage. So put the 15mm wrench over the pedal, and then we're going to put our foot on top of the pedal and hold the rear brake so the bike doesn't go anywhere. Put some weight on it pedaling forward, and we're going to bust the pedal loose going backwards. Pedals are actually a directional thing, and I've seen a lot of people mess up crank arms and pedal threads like that, trying to thread in the left pedal into the right crank arm. My advice, as long as they're both threading in going forward towards the front end of the bicycle, that's how you know they're both threading in the right direction and you're done messing up pedal threads. That actually leads me into the next topic. Go ahead and grab an 8mm Allen wrench. You're gonna wanna check these crank arm bolts in the very bottom of the frame right there. I've seen so many of those electric bikes in particular from the factory come loose on people, and they start riding and it actually reams those threads out over time, when a simple preventative measure of putting a half a turn of torque on that bolt could have saved them so much time and hundreds of dollars. A lot of electric bikes have a torque sensor, or at least a magnet sensor that's inside the crank right there. If the bottom bracket decides to rotate and rip, it'll rip those wires, and then automatically with your brand new bike, you're into hundreds of dollars of repairs that could have been solved by just a quarter turn of that bolt. Another tip I really wanted to talk about is, how do I wash the bike? I get this question so often. If the bike's really muddy and dirty, this might sound kind of controversial, but honestly what I would do with an electric bike is I would soap the bike all the way down, degrease it, try to avoid the brake pad areas. I would put some rags over the brake calipers and brake rotors, clean rags, not rags with grease, because grease will run with water going over it. And I would soap the whole thing. My number one rule is do not pressure wash the bike, meaning all these connections right here, I would keep a pressure washer well out of the way of all this stuff. And really with any bike in general, I would not pressure wash it. This is not an ad. I just really enjoy BioWash. It smells really good, and you don't have to worry that it's going to wreck the bike or wreck the paint or dull anything. Bikes you just want to keep clean in general. You can spray the BioWash on there, wait a couple minutes, wipe it all down. It eats all the grease and dirt away, and you're not stuck hosing the whole bike down. And it's a very clean process, and it's controlled, so you can even do it in your garage, which is a really good way to clean. As far as keeping the chain clean too, if you apply chain lube 2 or 3 times, it's going to start to gum up. Doesn't matter what chain lube it is, they all do that. I would take a rag you don't care about getting dirty, put that over the chain and run the chain through it a couple times before reapplying the lubricant. And every time you wash the bike, definitely go back and reapply the chain lube, and maybe even grease some of the cables. That way you don't have any rust collecting underneath any of the cables, because it will. If you wash the bike, water will get stuck in there. Wash with a hose, wash with soap, wash with BioWash. Do not pressure wash. All right, I really appreciate you guys hanging out in the shop with me this afternoon. Again, my name's Forrest. This is Forrest Outdoor and Adventure. We post a lot of adventure videos on this channel, so if you guys want, check out the playlist. I'm going to link it in the description of this video. You can watch plenty of other videos just like this one. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, check out the playlist in the description, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.